everyone. Ogre27 Kane here today, and I think we're going to do a review of Salt and Sanctuary. Let's start out with a real quick overview. This is a 2D Dark Souls inspired Metroidvania. It has a bit of a dark and drab art style, but it's very beautifully done and the game has gorgeous animation. On top of that, the soundtrack is top notch and all of the control is fantastically done. Now this game does have a sequel that just recently released called Salt and Sacrifice, but I've only ever played through this one, and so this review will only be dealing with this game. This game came out quite a while ago and it is on Steam, PS4, PS5, Xbox Series, and Nintendo Switch. I personally have the physical edition of the Switch version and it has tons of extra goodies in it. I personally love the map, it has helped me out a ton. So, I think we should get into the first category, and starting with the gameplay. Well, as I mentioned, the gameplay in this is a 2D Metroidvania, but the action-adventure elements in this are very heavily dependent on the Dark Souls side of things. As you can see here, there's a health gauge, stamina gauge, and you have heavy and light attacks controlled through your L and R triggers. You also have a dash or dodge roll, if you will, and other abilities tied to it through magic. On top of that, the gameplay also features a really heavy emphasis on exploration. I love the fact that there are tons of little hidden nooks and crannies, and you really have to play into the darkness aesthetic to really understand what they were going for. There are a ton of things hidden in every little crevice all over the place. I do have to mention a little bit in this video that there are some spoilers in terms of some of the bosses that I show, as this is a new Game Plus character and I kind of fly through everything unknowing. But let's move on. Another little cool gameplay feature that I have to mention about this is how the weapons, armor, and items all work. It's very similar to Dark Souls, where as you come across them and find them in treasure chests and by defeating certain enemies, you will gain access to them and then you can in turn upgrade them. Now, also very akin to Dark Souls, you have to have specific items that you can buy from a very small and hidden NPC in the game, or through defeating certain enemies. Then you can upgrade those weapons and items to basically max out your character and become OP like this character is here. This character just basically slaughters through everything in the game, and it's kind of my backup fun file when I'm just out exploring having fun. So let's move on to story now. The story in this game starts out with you waking up on a beach on an island. Not really fully understanding or comprehending what's going on around you, you begin to explore. As you explore, you come across these sanctuaries and different covenants and groups, and realize that this island is heavily populated. But a lot of the population that is on this island are these beings of salt, as you will, these enemies that you see here. There are a few humans scattered about, and they do their best to stay alive, but they're not really relevant other than to give you small elements and tidbits to the story. The other cool element to this is once you figure out what you're doing, the game has a almost twist to the end of it, and it relies heavily on your use of New Game Plus. Once you begin to understand who you are and what you're doing in the world, that New Game Plus feature doesn't bother you, or plays in rather well to the story itself, very much akin to the way that Dark Souls does. The other thing I have to mention about the story in this game is that it really is kind of a secondary to the combat and exploration itself. The attitude is very sombering and quiet, and the ambience and the music itself is very quiet too. You really only have music in certain areas or boss fights. A lot of it is just the sound of you moving through the area and the enemies attacking you. It almost has a certain overburdening feeling to it, almost an overbearance to it. But I love it because it keeps you on your toes and it really forces you to stay on edge all the way through every single fight. And there are a lot of fights in this game. Speaking of which, I think we should move on to combat now. Well, the combat in this is kind of what you would expect from a 2D Dark Souls Metroidvania clone. But don't let that dissuade you in any way, shape, or form, as it's really fast and frantic, and the game has a ton of variation to how you choose to use that combat. Whether you're using magic and a fast-paced, agile character, or whether you're using a heavy character with heavy weapons and armor that just slowly rolls around, it's totally up to you. But the game does offer a ton of variation and it's very well balanced for all of the different combat that you use and maneuver. Now, that being said, there are some aspects of the game that are better than others in terms of, say, strength is a little better than dexterity, but that doesn't impact you if you begin to use magic. Another really fun aspect too about the combat is how if you want to manipulate your character in a certain way, there are tons of items and weapons and armor that you can use to alleviate those additions, such as with my character, I have a ton of stamina-inducing things with heavy armor and a heavy weapon, but I have trinkets on me that constantly refill my stamina and give me all of the edges that I need to stay competitive. The game is so fast-paced that if you screw up even once, a lot of times you'll pay for it. The only other thing I need to mention is that you need to be patient with this game and you need to learn the combat. You need to accept the fact that you will die a lot. This game is very rewarding though when you figure this out. So let's move on to the next category, the graphics and animations. So the graphics in this game are, as you see, basically a 2D watercolor aesthetic, but the animation quality is very, very high, and every single character and every single movement, enemy, everything that you have has its own frames of animation. On top of that, the frame rate is very stable, it's locked, I never had any issues with that, and I never had a cheap death due to frame rate. The performance is top-notch too. I never had this game crash on me, I never had this game give me any sort of flack or any issues. This game is pretty old, and it's one of the first really truly good Metroidvanias on the Switch that I can remember, and even when it first came out, it ran buttery smooth. The studio that did this, Renegade Kid, really put their time and effort into making this game great on all platforms, and as far as I know, there really are no issues no matter how you choose to play it. The only thing I can remotely think of that I'm not really too big on is the character portraits themselves, as they kind of look like a potato head. It's a very minor gripe, and once you have a helmet on, that goes away. You just see it with NPCs and other characters. So let's move on now to the controls and audio. Well, we're going to start out right with the audio, and I'm going to give you a great example of how the music ramps up right as you get into a fight. So let's check this out. Pretty top-notch if you ask me. I really enjoy the audio in this game. I think all the boss fights are fantastic, and all of the aesthetic between the weapons and items and everything you use is very well done, and all of it meshes fantastically. There's not a lot of overbearance or overused sound either. Now, the game is very quiet and somber as you're exploring the world. A lot of times you'll just hear your armor moving around or things like that. But this doesn't bother me in any way, shape, or form, and it really adds to the ambiance to me, almost to the horror, the excitement that you feel. So let's touch on the controls real quick. And the controls are very similar to Dark Souls. I hate to keep using that reference in this video, but it is the closest thing I can come to with this game, and this game really pays it a tremendous homage. You have the left and right triggers for your heavy attacks and weak attacks, and for your dodge roll and other maneuvers such as using magic. You have A and B for selecting and jumping, and you have X and Y for other things, using potions, selecting through things. Directional buttons as well change between your weapons. You can have multiple swords or a bow and arrow equipped, or magic, or a shield, or whatever you want. You can go back and forth between two-handed or one-handed, and you can maintain all of those different weapons in such form or fashion. The control scheme in this is set, but it does allow you everything you'll need from a good control scheme to operate everything in a fast and tight situation. The last thing I need to mention is that all of your movement and actions have weight to them, so keep that in mind as you're learning the scheme you want. Let's do conclusion now. Well, in conclusion, this is one of my favorite Metroidvania Dark Souls clones that there is out there. This game kind of came out early on the Switch and really surprised me, and to be honest, I kind of use it as a litmus now for all other Metroidvanias other than maybe Dread. This game really focuses heavily on things that I truly love about a game like this, like exploration, like upgrading your character, like finding those hidden things and story elements, like putting everything together to really impress you, not just graphically, not just through the sound, but through the story, through the combat, and every other piece and element you can combine. This game is worth your money in every way, shape, and form, and I know it's really expensive now for a physical version. If you can only afford it digitally, then I highly recommend it that way. On top of that, this game is getting a little older now, so it's just going to continue to rise in value. So get on it now before you lose your opportunity to try one of the best Dark Souls clones I've ever played. The last thing I really need to mention about this game is that I played this game a long time ago, and a viewer recently asked me about good recommendations on these type of games. This was the first game that came to mind, and I'm glad I recommended it to him as it brought me back to playing this game through myself. I enjoy this game highly, and I hope you do too. Well, thank you for watching today's video. It was a blast to make. I upload every single Monday. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. And have a great rest of your day. This is Ogre27Kane signing out.